Well, Professor Sharon Parker, look at the crowd you've drawn in today. Anyway, I think it's wonderful. So welcome everyone, and welcome on what is World Mental Health Day today. So make sure we all kind of look after ourselves and those around us as well. I think most of you know me. I'm Irma Ranieri, Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, and I'd like to welcome you on the couch or little chairs with Professor Sharon Parker. I also want to acknowledge that we meet today on the traditional lands for the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. I want to acknowledge the Kaurna people as our custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Given it is World Mental Health Day, if you do know any Aboriginal staff in the public sector, please give a sort of special support to all of them as we go through what I think is a very interesting time culturally for a lot of them. So look after each other, I guess is my opening statement in relation to that. I'd like to acknowledge IPA's other major partners, in particular the Senior Leadership Council who support, and we're mostly all on the council as well. I want to thank so much Professor Sharon Parker, Director for the Centre for Transformative Work Design. I want to know a bit more about it. I've read about it, but we're going to have a conversation about it. Can you have your mobiles on silent? I think you know where the facilities are. Emergency, we need to evacuate. Can you follow the staff as they lead you outside? I would say probably IPA staff here. If you have to leave, please do it discreetly in between questions, and we have received some questions via Slido, which I'll try and weave in. I do want a chance for everyone to ask questions in the audience. I want to leave some time for that because I know that we'll be triggered on things that you might say, Sharon, and we want to ask a question that's sort of coming to mind. So I'll look out for that as we do the Q&A. So I'm going to get right into it. Now, I've got a fairly lengthy introduction, but, you know, there's a lot that you've done, Sharon, so here we go. No, I think we need to know how important Sharon is. Australian Research Council Laureate Fellow Sharon Parker is a John Curtin Distinguished Professor at Curtin University, Director of the Centre for Transformative Work Design at the university. She's a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences and a Fellow of the Society for Industrial and Organisational Psychology. Have you come to the right place? We need you. She's a recipient of the Australian Research Council's Kathleen Fitzpatrick Award, the Academy of Management OB Division Mentoring Award, and in November of 2019, Sharon was named among the world's most influential scientists in the Web of Science Group 2019 list of 2019 highly cited researchers, and the only female in Australia appearing on the list in the field of economics and business. That is to be celebrated. You have published more than 200 internationally referenced articles on topics such as work design, proactive behaviour, mental health and job performance, and has over 39,500 citations. Having worked in a university, that is amazing. She was Associate Editor for the Journal of Applied Psychology and Academy of Management. Is it Annals? Is that what Annals? Didn't want to get that one wrong. But sometimes it felt like that at universities. Sharon has attracted competitive research funding worth over $40 million. You must be very good at what you do, Sharon, and has worked for a range of public and private organisations, and I know my own team has been working with Sharon. She's the founder of the SMART model, which we'll explore a bit more today, co-founder of the Thrive at Work initiative, and has contributed to policy on work design in Australia and internationally. Sharon, we need your insights now more than ever. Welcome, Professor Sharon Parker.
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you for inviting me today to be here to talk. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Whadjuk people from Perth, which is where I'm from. So it's a beautiful day here in Adelaide. After I do this presentation, I'm going to go and sit in the sun and have a coffee, and I hope each of you get a little moment today to look after your mental health and well-being. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the SMART model. I'm just going to give you about apparently 8 minutes, and someone's going to tell me when 8 minutes is up, and then we're going to get on the couch and answer some questions. So I'd just like to start with this sort of iceberg metaphor, I guess. So what we see often at work are symptoms of poor work design. So we see stress, we see poor job performance, we see a lack of innovation. But what we also often see is responses to those things that are not about work design. So we see people sent to EAPs, we see people sent off for training because their performance is low, and we see organisations create fun zones and slides in the office and these sorts of things. And they can be appropriate strategies, but they can also be inappropriate because they're not getting to the root cause of some of these outcomes. And work design is often the root cause, not always, but often the root cause. So I want to share with you this SMART work design model. And what it is a synthesis of more than 100 years of research on this topic. So what you can see listed there, very small, and don't worry, I'm going to unpack this, is more than 30 dimensions of work that have been studied and shown to be psychologically important for people, for mental health and performance and those sorts of things that I just mentioned. But that's hard when you're in an organisation thinking about 30 different characteristics. So we use this technique called higher order factor analysis to cluster or to group these attributes. So the first group, and I'm going to unpack each of these a little bit more, but the first group is stimulating. So this is about work, having task variety, using your skills, doing some complex, interesting things. M is for mastery. And this is sort of premised on the idea that people go to work and they want to do well, most of them. 99.9% of people want to do well when they go to work, but to do well, they need to know what it is they're meant to be doing. They need to have clarity, they need to get feedback, and it really helps if they can see where does their work fit in the bigger picture. A is for agency. This is autonomy, the importance of control and influence in work. R is for relational. At the end of the day, and we saw this through COVID, we all have a fundamental need to connect with other people, and relational work is about enabling and supporting that connection. And then T, I always call the big one, because this is about the importance of demands at work that are tolerable. It's not about eradicating demands, because the definition of work really is demands. It's things you've got to do. It's goals you've got to achieve. But those goals, those things you need to do, need to be tolerable. So that's the model in a nutshell, and I'm just going to unpack that a little bit more. For those of you who are looking at this from a psychosocial hazard lens, I'm not going to go through this, but just to say all of the traditional psychosocial hazards can be mapped onto this model. So it's a useful heuristic, is the way that I look at it, for tackling some of those hazards. And as mentioned, there's a lot of research on this topic already. We don't need to recreate the wheel, showing that when you've got those elements of work design that I've just talked about, it's good for mental health, but it's also good for performance and motivation, and it's also good for learning and growth. And I'll give some examples of that. So let's take a little bit more look at stimulating. So this is about that sort of work in which people have got variety, they're using their skills, they're learning, they're growing. And you'll see here some sketches. One of the things that we did to try and convey what work design is in our centre was to have an artist in residence, and we interviewed people and we sketched people. And you can see these are hospital supply workers, but they're talking about how much they like the variety in their work. There's never a dull moment. This job teaches me a lot. So they feel that they're learning and growing. And conversely, we see here a Deliveroo driver saying, my job is so boring because I spend so much time just waiting for an order. If you've got boring work, there are lots of risks. I actually just did a Life Matters podcast on boring work recently. You wouldn't think there was so much to talk about it, but there is. Physically, if you're doing very repetitive work, you've got musculoskeletal injuries and these sorts of challenges. But I do like to share the example of a French guy who worked in a perfumery who actually sued his company for bore-out, not burnout, bore-out, because he was going to work every day and really had to just order a few supplies, and by 10 o'clock he was done. But he had to be there all day. And basically that just was, he referred to it as a descent into hell. And really affected his mental health. And by the way, he won that claim and he was awarded more than 40,000 euros. Lots of other, and I won't go into all the detail here, but lots of other consequences if you don't have stimulating work. Let's go to mastery. So mastery is about knowing what you should be doing in your work. So you'll be familiar, some of you, with the psychosocial hazard of sometimes called role ambiguity, which basically means you're at work but you don't know what it is you should be doing, or there's so many things you should be doing you don't know which of them is the most important. So mastery is about having clarity. It's about getting feedback. There's no good having clear goals if you don't get any feedback on how you're doing. And it's about understanding where your work sits in the bigger picture of the organisation. So here you see an aged care assistant talking about the importance of regular appraisals and just feeling appreciated and acknowledged in the work. And actually role clarity, I'll talk a bit later about some work we're doing in aged care. Role clarity is a big issue, or lack of role clarity, I should say, in that sector. There's a huge amount of evidence that if people don't know what they're doing, it is stressful and depressing, and that's 7 minutes. So that's 1 minute to wrap up. So at the end of the day, though, really important to build mastery in from a mental health perspective. And I'm just going to give this example, and then I'm going to skip over the other two. But to give an example of how can you enhance something like mastery at work, we did a big project with surgical teams, and you may know that surgical teams come together at the beginning of a list, and sometimes they don't even know each other, they may not have worked together. So we introduced a very simple initiative where for 5 minutes, the different professionals, the anaesthetists, the surgeons, and so on would come together and plan the day. Sounds not like rocket science, but it took a lot of rocket science to get this to happen. And what we found with that is that it really impacted on staff engagement and motivation. So you can see, for example, a surgeon saying, I feel unhappy if I haven't done a briefing. It feels like getting into a car and not putting on a seatbelt. You don't feel safe. You feel like something is missing. And you see nurses and technicians. So it was a positive initiative. And one of the reasons it was positive was because in that 5 minutes, they planned the day and they clarified the roles. And what will the nurse be? There more than one nurse usually. Which nurse will do what? Do they want to swap around, get a bit of a chance to develop their skills? Do they know each other's names? And these sorts of things. We saw more engagement. We saw 50% reduction in delays, and that in one hospital alone saved more than 3 million a year. And we saw better safety communication. What we were trying to do actually was get nurses, anaesthetists and others to talk to each other, because that is where the accidents usually occur because of those miscommunications, and we achieved that. A is all about autonomy and the importance of agency and autonomy at work. I'm going to skip over these because we can talk more about them on the couch. R is about the importance of relational aspects at work, connection, being part of a team, getting social support, getting emotional support, feeling that you're part of something bigger than you, all of those sorts of things. And here you see a dancer actually talking about how you get put down a lot for the way you look, and all sorts of negative and abusive, actually, I would say, behaviours that actually erode a positive relational atmosphere at work. And then T is about having tolerable demands. You can see here on the left, this is a geneticist talking about the biggest demand is not having enough time. And you can see on the right, surgeons talking about the emotional demands in work. So the demands that we have at work can be about time, they can be cognitive, they can be physical, they can be emotional, but what we need to do is make sure in the end, that they are tolerable, that they feel okay, that we can cope with them. And I'm going to leave it there. So I will do just a little advertisement. If this topic catches your interest, in February we are having a fantastic conference in Perth. I know it's a long way away, but it's a great city, just like Adelaide. So please do consider coming. It's designed to be both practical and thought leadership, and we have some of the world's best researchers and practical speakers on the topic there. So I hope you will consider coming. Thank you.
There's lots to talk about on that, and I thought, don't hurry up the last bit, the tolerable, because that's kind of where, so we might need to talk about that. So I'll open up with just some questions that might help you kind of explore it a bit more. What was the need that you saw in organisations that initially drew you to work design? So you said, we've kind of understood this for a while. You simplified it.
Yeah.
And so what drew you to doing this?
Yeah,
work?
I mean, actually, I was doing a PhD in England, in South Yorkshire. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. So lots of steelworking companies, lots of traditional manufacturing. And one of the things I saw there was actually an electronics company, self-managing teams was introduced. And I have to say that the transformation that I saw in people was radical. And one of the guys I interviewed talked about growing up. I've gone from being a child at work to being an adult at work. And to be honest, from that moment on, I just became passionate about the topic of work design, because actually I witnessed that, but I couldn't see so much in the research and in the practice about work design. So that it's always sort of been my mission, I guess, to create better work, to see that transformative change. That's why I call it the Centre for Transformative Work Design, because I think when you get it right, it can be transformative for people.
What did that company, so you said self-managed teams for what was a kind of sort of the company that had done it differently. What did they do with the leadership? What had changed there to get them to be self-managing teams? So
a lot was required, actually. So, first of all, there was actually happened to be a guy there. This is 30 years ago, by the way. So people who think that self-managing teams are new, they're not. They've been around a long time. But he was really passionate about the change, but it required a lot. And this is something to talk about when you really change work in that quite radical way. You've got to put in place the new structure. So in that case, it was accompanied by something called product lines. So instead of everybody just doing a tiny little bit like a traditional assembly line, they grouped people together, and a group of people would make a particular product. So that they get that task identity that I said before, doing the whole job. So they made that sort of change. But if you introduce self-managing teams, it changes the role of the manager hugely, right?
I was going to say that.
Yeah, the manager changes from being a director and a controller of work to actually being a facilitator and an enabler. And there were fewer managers required. So that also took some support as to what did those managers do. In this organisation, they made a commitment for no redundancies, but they moved and they reskilled people and into different roles. So the manager's role changed hugely. So they really became people whose job it was mostly actually to deal with conflict in the team and to manage the boundary of the team with other teams. That's what their role changed to. That took really different skills to telling people what to do. They also had to invest quite a lot of training in the workers too, because people are suddenly making decisions. They needed some training in how to do that, and to sort of move away from a feeling of I'll get in trouble if I do something wrong. They had to learn. So it's not an instant change, actually. But, not only we measured systematically the impact on mental health, commitment, job satisfaction, all of those things went up, but also the quality of the products improved, the lead time, which is the time it takes to build products, radically reduced. So it was a successful initiative from the point of view of the organisation and the individuals. And for me, that's the holy grail. It's always, to me, about trying to create work that's good for the workers and good for the outcome.
I agree, and it's a good thing for us to try and get better at, I think, in government in particular. So I do want to hone in a bit on, I guess, your work in government. So what I do want to explore, so next, at the end of this year, the Work Health and Safety Amendment regulations have been announced, and psychosocial risk will be implemented on the 26th of December. Merry Christmas, everyone. So I think this group in particular, given that where they work, might be wanting a little bit of advice for leaders who could use, I guess, applying the work design to manage the psychosocial risks, because we're going to have to find a way, I think, of firstly defining it. So I think your little model, or what you were describing, is actually a really good approach on how we might start to unpack some of that when it's actually embedded in work health and safety. So what are your views about how we might approach that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to see the topic even being discussed. It's fabulous. So it's a complicated answer to the question, in the sense of you can approach this topic of work design from many different levels. But if we're talking about local leaders, so the managers, the people who are managing 5 or 6 or 10 people, what can they do? Well, first of all, their own behaviour is going to have a huge impact on smart work design. So let's go to that mastery component, the role clarity. Role clarity is about being clear what it is you should be doing. Leaders can make a big difference to shaping people's role clarity by communicating clearly what it is they want people to be doing, or what of the different priorities people might have are most important. So leaders can play a really important role for each of those elements in their direct behaviour. Agency, autonomy. If you've got a boss who's a micromanager, that's going to reduce that agency. So looking at your own behaviour is important, but also as a manager, you can usually craft the work and how your team works. So you might decide, for example, that it's time that some people share their roles a bit more, because some are just bored and getting really stuck in those roles. So you might do a bit of job rotation or a bit of job expansion, and so on. So I won't go through all the different things that you could do, but leaders can play a really, really important role. You know, of course, there's a lot of talk about compliance, and there's forms to fill out and boxes to tick. I just really encourage people, yes, you've got to do that, I understand, but what this is fundamentally about is talking to your staff and trying to take their perspective around their work design and co-creating good work with them.
I totally agree with you. I think the public service has so many, including, you know, where the stuff that comes from my office. So one of the things I think we have to reconcile is our really archaic system of classifying jobs, and I can see everyone nodding in relation to that, but it will require massive change to change classifications, and then it's a big piece of work. I've always believed that local managers have got control over, you know, within the boundaries of that role that's really broadly described. Most of the work is in other duties as directed. You can actually have a level of control about what happens sort of day to day. It's how people in those leadership roles interpret those rules, basically. So one of my questions was, so I think I was talking to my office, Helen and Joanne in particular were saying, look, we could put something out to talk about the smart work design and how people can apply that at the local. We're going to trial it in our own office. Anyone in my office, that's what we're doing. Letting you know now. But there's a key here. You mentioned the manager or the leader being comfortable with, you know, going a little bit outside of what they think are the rules, talking to people about how they can maybe move around and help kind of deal with the tolerance and other things. What skills do we need to give our managers, and how explicit do we actually have to be to actually say your job is to make sure that you're as flexible as possible to ensure, and I think we have a great opportunity with the psychosocial risk because it now sits under legislation. So what do you think we need to do to kind of push this along? We can give them a framework. what do they need to do as leaders?
Yeah, so, if we're talking local leaders, it really does help to have a bit of training about work design and, what that is, examples of how people have done it elsewhere. That always helps. Sometimes people need some training, some development around their behaviours more. So because if you're talking about, for example, if you're someone who, wants to micromanage people, that usually comes out of a sort of fear, or it comes out of wanting to be perfectionist. It comes out of a fairly deep place, okay?
Yeah.
If you want that person to let go and trust people, you're not just going to go, let go and trust people, right?
Gee, that didn't work then. I tried that.
So sometimes some deeper development is also required to really shift things.
That's pretty hard. Well, you're talking about personal values. Maybe, a lot of us have had experiences where you might have been bitten by a previous boss. It's not going to happen to you. So, then we're back at the EAP, aren't we?
But then I think what's really important, so we're talking about, say, if at the local level, then you need that support from the senior management.
So someone's got to be intuitive enough to pick up on it.
Well, and people at the senior level need to be saying, we want to improve work design, we want to support you, we want to invest in this, we want to, we want to role model, in fact, even those behaviours and so on. So you do need that high level commitment. I've tried over the years many times to work on improving work design from a purely bottom-up perspective, and it can be challenging.
Yeah.
Because you just don't, if do a lot of work in, I have to be careful, this is on, do a lot of work in some very hierarchical bureaucratic organisations, it can be really challenging talking about things like agency and autonomy. Because there's such a fear of mistake. And so it's going to be really hard to shift some of those things without that senior leadership going, we're behind this. So that's important too. Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the questions here is how can senior leaders show their commitment to the process? I'm one of those senior leaders sitting on the Senior Leadership Council, and I think there's a couple of kind of crossroads here. One is the psychosocial and how we might approach it. And I think that I'm certainly saying I'm committing to at least having a conversation with the senior executives and putting something out from my office in relation to work design and perhaps how we go forward, because then I'm going to go into, I guess, and that's on the record, how we're going to go into what you've been calling future of work. And then I will open it up for some questions, because there's a whole lot of things that have happened. We've had COVID over the last 3 or 4 years. We've actually done things a bit differently, so no longer do I have to bang on about flexible work to raise my children. Everyone seems to be okay with that. So we've had a burning platform in relation to that. What's happened, I think, is that we don't actually know what the new normal is. I think we're having to talk more about sort of work design and what we're comfortable with versus what people want. And I think that there was something in your bio around productivity, so people's leaders in particular who want presenteeism. So I just want you to kind of talk a little bit about the burning platform for actually moving now to a new conversation, because I don't like calling it the future of work, because it's almost generational change and we expect something different. I do too, with ageing parent. So just talk to me a little bit about what can we shift now, given we can't really remember what it was like. So I think the opportunity's here, but we've got to do the right thing, otherwise we might lose the opportunity.
Yeah, great. And we've actually done a lot of work on remote working and hybrid working from a research perspective.
Oh, good.
But I guess one of the things I would advocate, and this is what's borne out in our research as well, is if you go to the SMART model, what you want to be trying to create is good work design, irrespective of where people are, right? So, in fact, we for example, we tracked people through COVID. We tracked people 15 times, actually, over COVID, more than 1,000 people. We identified 2 trajectories. Some people, 80% of people, their stress improved over time. They adapted to the change. 20% of people started with higher stress and got worse. What defined that group of people? It was people who had intolerable demands. They had low agency, they had close monitoring or surveillance of them, or they were understimulated, bored. So it doesn't really matter whether you're working at home, working in the office, both. You want to have good work design. So that's the first thing that I would suggest.
That's good, yeah.
In terms of achieving that, actually hybrid, as most people will say, gives the best of both worlds usually. But when you look at the SMART model, it's good to look at it holistically. For example, people working at home whenever they like, that's sort of agency, but I'd almost call it anarchy, okay? Because there's also an R component in the model, which is about relational, and we know that there's some benefits for people to come to work at least occasionally and have face-to-face connection. So we need a balance across those dimensions. And so for most purposes, you know, some remote, some in the office is going to be the optimal. And what you want to allow people is as much agency as is appropriate and reasonable within the bounds of also having some relational connections with people.
You've described that well. The conversations I've had with my colleagues, and I'm talking chief executive level, is that they feel like, and I'm being like, we've lost the ability to kind of go, I want you to come in the office, and then people kind of saying, well, no, I've managed to be able to do that from over here, so I want to work full time.
Yep.
And then it becomes this debate. I've tried not to get there. I think I've been pulling the relational thing because I need it more than anyone as a leader. And so I think that what we need is for senior managers to have, I guess, I don't want to use the word authority, but have permission to kind of explain why that's important, because it's a reciprocal.
Yep.
So it's sometimes they need to kind of talk something through or whatever. So how would you kind of reconcile that? Because I'm finding it really hard to explain to them. So then I think what we do is apply rules, and I did it in my own team. I said, well, one day from home, unless there are other things or you need, individuals need it, rather than, so then you have some sort of same parameters for everyone, and then it's an individual kind of discussion so we can get to what you're describing. So just talk to me a bit about that. I don't know what to say.
It's not easy. And honestly, I think we're all still learning a little bit.
I think we are.
Yeah. But I think that the danger of saying everyone's got to be back in the office 5 days a week is you're taking away that agency. Often there's no reason. It's more the worry of the manager that people are not working at home or whatever. So that's one side of the coin, completely telling everyone to be in, if it's not required, is going to just smack of control, right? On the other hand, allowing everyone to stay home whenever they like,
feel like it,
doesn't mean you get the work done, right? Because it is important to recognise in many organisations, getting the work done requires people coming together. And it will be done better if people come together face to face. So, example, we have visitors come to our place, we have seminars. I ask people to come always to the seminars. Yes, there's an online for emergencies, but it's okay as a manager to say, I need you here for these things and come in. So we shouldn't confuse agency and autonomy with anarchy, I think.
And government's a bit different because sometimes you don't know what these things are, but they could actually happen on that day.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you do need it, but then you're having to sort of find how you might achieve that. But I think you
have to give local managers a little bit of flexibility because, it might be that certain sorts of work, it's better if everyone's there sort of 3 days and not them, and Monday, Friday doesn't matter. But it might be other workplaces, it's better to have a distribution of people across the week and they don't all need to be there. So you have to sort of figure those things out.
And this is where the self-managing teams could actually give you some proposals around that, how that would work. So let me just finish off with this, and then I will open up for questions. If not, I've got plenty more. So 2/3 of the workforce in the public sector, and I want you to draw some public sector experiences here, are frontline workers.
Yep.
So, I mean, you had some examples there of people working in hospitals and the rest of it. So when we talk about hybrid working, and I think it's probably possible to do it more hybrid on frontline, but at the moment, basically, they would see themselves, so that's 76,000 in the public service, so really it's only about 10,000 people that office kind of workers that could actually do this. What do we say to those frontline workers, and how do they use the smart design? And I saw a bit in your slides around that.
Yeah.
So how your work in Sydney, I think in particular, or in New South Wales?
So we'll be doing a lot of work. We have a big project called Design for Care, and that is working in the care sector, so disability care, aged care, a bit of community care. That is an exceptionally tough environment, I have to say, to look at this topic. You've got overloaded staff, difficulties attracting staff, you've got people leaving all the time, you've got managers who are burnt out, you've got workers who are burnt out, you've got client needs changing, becoming more complex due to an ageing population. It's a really tough context. So what we've been doing there is working with the workers themselves to say, what can we do to make your work smarter? And this is actually driven by, we're funded by iCare New South Wales, who have got rising workers' compensation claims due to mental health. That's where the funding is coming.
And we could end up there with some of the...
And it's the fastest growing category of workers' compensation claims, costing an absolute fortune. So what we talk about with these groups, what's in your sphere of control? Of course, many of the things like getting more staff, those are things that are definitely needed, but they're not in your sphere of control. What can we do as a team, as a department, at whatever level we're working, that's in your sphere of control? So sometimes some very simple things can be very powerful. Just to give a couple of examples, temporary people, constant temporary people coming in all the time. Insufficient handover of those, insufficient induction of those new people. So they're coming in, they don't know what to do, there's no processes for actually supporting them as they come into work. So really simple initiatives around, okay, let's first of all have a little bit of overlap where the person who comes in to shift overlaps with the person who's leaving. That's seems like should be happening anyway, but it's not. Let's do things like that. Let's make sure we've got a decent handover process. So the interesting thing is we talk to managers and they're going, oh, but they've got a handover process. And then we look at the handover process, and in one case, for example, it's this tiny, tiny font, about 8-point font with sort of legal details of every client in the place. And somehow or other, a new person coming in has got to pick up this thing that you can barely read and figure out what, Mrs. Jones over there needs to be fed. And it doesn't work. Why would it work? But so what we've done is co-create with the people who do the job a system where they can make sure there's information available so it's clear what Mrs. Jones needs, and a temporary person coming in can see it straight away. And so it's a small thing, but it's a big thing because it doesn't happen otherwise, So, and then another example, we did some work the other day, some of my colleagues, around role clarity. So we had a group of first-line managers, really unclear, what is our role? And then we have the level above saying, well, we don't understand their problem. They've got a job description. What's their problem? Right? And so what we did was a little workshop where we, first of all, explained that a role is not a job description. There's all sorts of reasons why job descriptions and roles are two separate things. And then we got each party to say what they thought the other party's role was, and we did some activities around clarifying what are the role expectations. And again, just a small thing, but has made a difference already.
So one of the things we have in the public sector is that, whether they do it or not, every 6 months people need to have a review, performance review, and every 12 months. Certainly most managers and leaders now, I think, have got the message in the public service that they need to be talking to their staff. I actually think this is a really good point at which we could introduce some of the smart design things, thoughts.
Great. Yeah, no, so it's actually something that we've done at the Department of what was the Department of Agriculture, the National Department of Agriculture. And that's actually something, we've talked about how you can create smart work through what leaders do, but you can also create smarter work by embedding it into your human resource practices. And this would be an example.
Okay.
So going back to that iceberg model, one of the things we encouraged and, again, gave a little bit of training to the managers to do is talk about the smart work design model when you have your performance discussion with someone. Because what happens is we talk about how is that person performing, what training do they need, but we don't actually go beneath the iceberg and say, how's your work design? Are you feeling stimulated? Do you have enough agency? Are your demands tolerable? So the model is just a really nice way to have a conversation about what's beneath the iceberg that's not threatening. Because it can be a bit threatening to go, actually, my demands are intolerable, because you, manager, are giving me too much to do. But it's just a language to sort of have those conversations.
So potentially that is something that the office could actually design simply to have as part of my guidelines around how we might actually do these sort of one-on-one, because for me, the gem is in the one-on-one conversations regularly, rather than that sort of the review should be no surprises, but if you're having it in the regular conversations, you might then build up on it. Are you open to having a little bit of research and work with us as well?
Always.
Thank you so much. Team, off we go. I'm going to open it up for any questions. I can keep going, but I want to know if anyone's got some questions from the audience. I'd like to, yes? No, that's my team standing up with the microphones. No? Oh, here we go. We've got a question here, question there. I think it's important to ask them. I can round it off after.
Hi, Sophie Pantelios from South Australia Police. Just wondering whether you have delved into policing type organisations or emergency services and how you would apply your research into that industry.
First of all, my colleague Karina Dritsma does a lot of work with the emergency services in Western Australia. And again, trying to introduce these sorts of conversations. What I know from research is that sometimes the stresses in emergency service police are not so much the traumatic incidents and the things that people need to deal with, which are distressing, but what can be even worse is the environment in which you do it. And, I always like to share the example of my cousin who was a paramedic for 40 years, fabulous, strong woman who one day just had enough. And I talked to her, actually interviewed her about what happened. She said, we had a terrible road incident. I was out there, it was terrible. I came back, I needed a cup of tea. Because we measure whether ambulances are on the road, I had to go straight back out again to another incident. And she said, that just broke me. And she said, all I needed was a cup of tea and a chat, and I couldn't do that. So why couldn't she do that? Because we have a stupid metric. I don't know if this has changed, and I don't know if it applies here, but just giving an example of stupid metrics where performance is measured by how much the ambulance is out and about. And again, this is an example of how sometimes it's not just about the leaders, it's about the wider system within which they're embedded. And so when we talk about work design, we work with local leaders, but we work on what's in their sphere of control. Some of the really big changes come from those things that are outside their sphere of control, but, someone could influence. So look, there's a lot, I would love your opinion, you're the expert in that work, but my sense is that there's a lot to be looking at around work design in those environments.
I agree.
Especially because they are difficult, challenging jobs. It's almost like a litmus test. It makes good work design even more important. I don't know, what do you think though? I'd love to hear. We can chat more later.
Office to drive that connection with the decision makers, because quite often the health and safety professionals and that ability to influence sometimes can be better if it comes externally as well, and creating capability amongst executives to actually understand the importance of this, and then relaying that back to our, policy and, politicians and the environment that we work in, explaining why there's an increase in psychological claims, etc. So it's a big body of work, and certainly we will be looking at focusing on organisational and operational aspects, because the trauma's given that people are working
exactly.
in.
It's part of the
it's
job.
that fishbowl that they have to return to, and that
Yeah.
fishbowl has to be clean, not
Yeah,
dirty.
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Couldn't say it better myself.
I think the psychosocial and the psychological kind of, and the increase in some of those things will actually drive us to do this. And I think this is a really good way of actually starting to describe what we're going to expect of our leaders. And to me, it's simple, and it's also giving some level of control to the individual, which is where you get your gems of information. But leaders often don't hear that. Yep. So we've got to provide a way of getting, I guess, that feedback back up as well. So we will look at that. We'll work with you too. And we might pick some agencies where there is some of that intensity to see whether we could pilot some of these things as we go forward, because Helen and the team were actually talking to me about how we might use the smart work design approach as a good first step.
If I can just sort of leverage of what you've said to make a point. So one principle is that sort of working within what's your sphere of influence. Another principle is to try to get to the root cause of some of these things. And they don't always go hand in hand, because sometimes the root cause is outside of your sphere of influence. But I will share, I think, what is a win. We've been working a lot in the mining sector. We did a study of FIFO workers, so fly-in, fly-out workers, a few years ago. 33% of them had psychological distress at a level that they would benefit from getting therapy, basically. So 1/3 of those FIFO workers extremely stressed. Lots and lots of analysis and discussion. One of the most important factors, would anyone like to guess, in influencing their mental health is the rosters. Right? If you're on a roster, and most of the managers are on rosters where you're away 1 week, home 1 week. Most of the frontline workers are on rosters, they were on rosters where you're away 3 weeks, home 1 week or 2 weeks. And fatigue and being away from you, all these issues were huge. So after lots and lots of pushing rosters, because no one wants to hear that, right? No. That costs a lot of money. No one wants to hear about that. They want to send them all on resilience training, but...
Stop being human.
But I have to say that we've just done another survey in the mining sector, and it looks like there's been a big shift away from those really bad rosters.
And they changed the rosters up, which actually meant that they were flying in, flying out more regularly.
And honestly, I think if you costed it out...
It's probably cheaper.
It's probably cheaper. But that's like a more system level change, and sometimes we do need those as well. So we can work at the bottom and find what's in our sphere of control and make those small changes that I talked about, but sometimes we need to simultaneously operate at that higher level too.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. There was a question here. Is that right? Yep. Just here?
Christy Peroni in health. So I'm going to ask about the T.
The T. Oh, yes. We haven't talked much about the T, have we?
Yeah, and you described the aged care sector and the acute health sector as well. With and this is not unique to South Australia, but across the globe, we're seeing very high burnout rates in our healthcare workers, and the demands on them are huge and growing, and the KPIs are about the importance of flow and getting ambulances off the ramp. But it takes away the agency of the staff in those wards where the patients are being pushed to when they say, we can't take anymore. We don't have the staff or the skills to manage these complex patients. And we don't have time to go have training because of the demand is constant. So we're kind of in this squeezed position where we really need to find some way to proactively get ahead of it instead of reacting to it because we're losing people so fast.
And that just creates more demands, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And cost.
Yeah.
Cost. And it's sad. It's sad to watch this happening. And we really need some leadership from the top with KPIs more than ramping that also look at the health of our staff to try and take care of our people. Are we seeing that?
Are we seeing that? No, but I do think the legislative changes create a stronger vehicle than we've had historically to start looking at those things. So long as people realise this connection, right, between, these high-level KPIs and how they flow down to affect people's work. So, there's no simple solution to a lot of this. We did another project on aged care in Perth, actually. And so we had intervention groups and we had control groups, as researchers like to try and do, which is a disaster in this context because everyone leaves and it's blah, blah. But actually the number of staff were increased because there were some changes in the models and things like that. But we didn't see any impact in the control group, even though the number of staff was increased. We only saw an impact in the intervention groups where people were being listened to and involved and supported. So, sometimes we think the solution is more staff, and absolutely, but it's also what we do with those staff, I think is the point I'm trying to make. It's how we make sure that the right supports are put in place with additional staff. So just to go to the T, because that is the biggest issue. So in aged care, compliance demands. We call them compliance demands. These are the demands. And every new policy, every inquiry seems to generate more compliance demands. And you can understand it, right? Somebody's had a terrible situation and it means let's introduce another rule. But the flow-on effect is the sort of world you're talking about where people, one of the saddest things I witness in that context is workers who really are there, most of them, because they care and they want to do the right thing, and they're so emotionally stressed because they can't help people because they're so busy in compliance. So something's gone horribly wrong. Let me just share with you an example of, it's a Dutch model called Buurtzorg. Are you familiar with that? So it is a radically different model of care. Now, I'm not saying we can just, and I know an organisation in Perth that's tried to introduce Buurtzorg. It's hard because we have a different system in Australia, but they are making some inroads. Buurtzorg is a model where, if we're thinking community care here, you have a small self-managing team of about 8 nurses, highly educated, and they are responsible for a geographic area. And in that geographic area, it might be a suburb or whatever, they support the community care. They have authority, they have a budget, they do all the care. So there's none of this, oh, I'm an educated nurse, so I can't change the wound or, so there's none of these cracks. They do what they need to do. Some of it is a bit more low level, some of it is high level. They've got a training budget. And this model so it's a self-managing team, basically. They've reduced the number of managers. So actually, I think it was Deloitte's, a consulting company, did an analysis of the cost effectiveness because everyone's like, oh, this is going to cost more. Actually, it was cheaper, this Buurtzorg model. They have been Employer of the Year for multiple years, so staff love it. Clients, it wins lots of customer aged care awards, and it's cheaper. But it's a radically different model. And I was having the sense of, wow, I would love this because, I'm trying to get care for my ageing mother, I'm calling someone, I think in Canberra, I don't know, in my aged care, I don't know where they're located, but they certainly didn't understand that I'm 500 kilometres away from my mother. And, you know, it's sort of just very, very different. We probably need some radical change in some of our models. That's way beyond my pay grade.
Well,
but I'd love to see, you know, like I mentioned, there's a company in Perth that is trying, within the constraints of the funding models, to create a sort of Bertzold style. And we've been measuring them, and we're seeing some really good progress.
We've got some people here that work in the excellence in innovation in health. I would pick up on that and actually see what we can do. Did you want to say something, Katie?
Yeah, happy to comment. Katie Billing, Sharon, we've met online.
I
so
recognise
Commission on
your
Excellence
face.
in Innovation
Yeah.
in Health, and our team have already connected Irma with Sharon's work. I guess for me, the opportunity from a senior leadership point of view, I wonder, Sharon, if I can put to you, many senior leaders have this thing that they say around, we just need to get to the culture. We just need to address culture. Are you comfortable, or to what degree perhaps are you comfortable with this being the first practical step?
I'm not a fan of culture. And it's not because I'm not a fan
Nor
of
am I.
culture. I really think culture is critical. But what is culture?
Exactly.
Culture is this amorphous, generic feel. To me, culture, I should actually put it on my iceberg. To me, it's at the top of the iceberg. What is it that generates culture? I'm interested in that. That interests me. And it is things like work design, leadership, quality, but, you know, the behaviours of the leader. So to start with culture, of course, it's fine to have that as an aspiration, but how are you going to get there? You're not going to get there with, you know, posters on the wall or mission statements that people just get annoyed about when they're broken. Sorry, I'm sounding a little bit cynical.
Well, can I just put a context on that? I think when I was looking at the smart, when you were putting up the kind of the smart design and what was going through my head was, that's actually a really neat way of actually saying, you know, identify, I guess, what's happening. I don't like using the word culture, but in the context of your microcosm or that hospital or wherever, how easy or hard is it going to be to do that? Because whatever's into play, people's behaviours, the way people are led, you know, people's history of what has happened there, your own personal value system. So I think the overlay here is you've got to understand whether it's going to take you a lot longer to shift, or whether you literally need to get rid of some of the leaders to even make some of this work. So that was what was going through my mind, but it was actually a very neat way of actually saying, for those of you that don't understand leadership very well and haven't led the team, we're going to expect you to start talking about these things with people, which in itself might change culture.
And let me be clear, I think culture is really important.
I know, yeah.
All I'm saying is, what's the leverage for changing culture? Where do you change culture? And to me, it's leader behaviours and work design would be, you know, probably
place.
70% of it. And there's probably some other communication and things like that make a difference too.
Good.
So, yeah.
We've got about 2 minutes. Is there anyone that's got a really burning question here? Over there? Yep.
Hi, my name's Jasmine Sinadinos. I'm with the Department for Education. My question is not really, I think, a question. It's more about some of the parameters that might restrict the shift to adopting this, which is, I guess, our Treasury Department, because I noticed that resourcing and budgets came up quite a bit.
You had to go there, didn't you? No.
I was just
With
thinking,
only 2 minutes.
have you got any experience or research that you've already done that helps to sell this to our budget holders, our Treasury, as maybe cost neutral or even a positive to shift to this new
I think
place?
it's easy to sell, but I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. You know, I guess it's sort of partly the word business case is coming to mind. You know, what's the business case for some of this? And, you know, being able to, there's a lot of data around the costs of poor mental health and well-being. So you would know some of those statistics, absenteeism, presenteeism, turning up when you're sick, turnover. Those things are huge. There's some evidence that mental health, not work design specifically, but mental health initiatives have a 2.5 return on investment, and in mining sectors and things it's much greater. So there is data around to make a case for the importance of creating work that's mentally healthy. But what I would also say is it's also about coming back to creating work that works for the organisation. So that, to me, as I said earlier, the holy grail is it's not just work designed for mental health and well-being, but it's work designed for mental health and well-being and productivity as well. And there are sweet spots that can be found, but they do take creativity and commitment and so on to get to those. So look, I think business cases can be made. What the bigger issue is, I think the bigger issue is, and in the last 30 seconds, is, you know, we live in this world of metrics and KPIs and, you know, that word managerialism. It's sort of it's an approach of managing people that's morphed over time, sort of really stems from the Industrial Revolution, really. It just makes all of this really, really hard. Because then you couple that with, you know, senior leaders who are ambitious, who don't stay very long, who want to do dramatic things that show up. Do you know what I mean? It's really challenging, I think, sometimes to get to shift away in the way that we might need to create, for example, that sort of radical new form of aged care.
Well, I've got to sum that up. I think that the business case will be made when the legislation's introduced, because then
that will help.
We will track, I guess, the cost and how claims are accepted, and then people not knowing, you know, how we assess whether someone has suffered some psychosocial hazard or whatever. So I think the legislation will drive us to get more figures on how much it's actually costing us. What I did want to sum up is I don't think this is a nice to talk about. Now, I've had 4 decades of working in the public sector. I know that's a long time. But now I think, I could have actually said we've got no hope of changing structure. I've worked through it myself. I actually think right now we cannot leave it as it is. I don't think society can cope. I don't want to talk about generational differences. Older workers, younger workers, middle of the road workers all want something different. I do too, because, you know, the world has changed for us. So I think we have the right platform right now, and the same will not get us to the ambitions that, when we heard the Premier speak last week, the ambitions of this government or any other government, or personally for society itself. So I think the time is right. We'd love to work with you, and I know my team's very keen to do that. Is there any final comments you want to make, Sharon, about this?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. It's terrific, and to see the fantastic questions and energy in the room. Yeah, look, I think we're talking about now some big things, but also remember that there's that more local small things. So, you know, maybe even just with your own team, talk about the model. Sometimes one thing I do, for example, with my team is we'll take one letter at each meeting and say, okay, let's have 10 or 15 minutes on stimulating. You know, so you can also use these ideas in a small way.
Great.
So big and small, we need them all, but don't be afraid to try it out.
That's great.
Locally as well.
For my team members, remember, this is what's going to come up in our virtual catch-ups. So I've got to pick a letter. First I've got to introduce it, then we'll pick a letter. But it's really good advice that we can actually do something ourselves and just apply it to your own lives as well. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. Please join me in thanking Sharon. And we're done. Thanks, Sharon. That was great.